I was provided with a review copy of the tile-laying game Between Two Castles, which will feature later in this video. This essential edition combines the original game and its expansion Secrets and Soirees, so thanks to Stonemaier Games. 2025 brings the release of Fate of the Fellowship, a Lord of the Rings themed reimagining of Matt Leacock's Pandemic, the modern landmark of cooperative board gaming, known for its many sequels and expansions. But Pandemic itself was inspired by Reiner Knizia's groundbreaking Lord of the Rings game, published by Hasbro in 2000. So with Fate of the Fellowship, Leacock brings the genre full circle back to Middle-earth, where much of cooperative gaming began. Yet, the genre is far from exhausted. Cooperative games still offer a wide design space for fresh mechanisms, themes and experiences. And in this video, I'll explore the key options and creative challenges facing designers of cooperative board games today. I'm Adam Porter. I'm a game designer from Wales, and on this channel I like to dip into specific genres and try to pinpoint the core elements frequently used in these games. So if you like what I do, please subscribe, comment and share the video. In Stardew Valley, the board game, players work together to complete objectives randomly chosen at the start of the game. Every little element of the game is super simple. Most involve simply rolling dice and seeing what you get, or drawing a random card from a deck. But the sheer number of possible actions, mining for minerals, growing crops, fishing at the river, looking after animals, makes the tasks quite tricky to manage efficiently. You only have so many turns available to complete your objectives, and if you don't achieve it, that's a loss for all players. Cooperative gaming isn't new. It wasn't invented by Matt Leacock with Pandemic. It's been utilised in educational children's games for decades, and intriguingly, the Landlord's game, Elizabeth McGee's precursor to Monopoly, featured a cooperative variant a century ago. But cooperative gaming burst into the hobby market in 2000 with Knizia's Lord of the Rings, which inspired numerous later designs, notably Arkham Horror and Shadows over Camelot, which were both released in 2005. Newcomer Matt Leacock was watching, and inspired by the real-life SARS outbreak in the early 2000s, he set about creating his own cooperative game. Pandemic took the gaming industry by storm and became the most celebrated example of the genre. Now, a cooperative game is one where all players work together, coordinating their actions to find the most effective, efficient path to a collective victory. A breath of fresh air in an industry full of cutthroat competition. In a cooperative game, players win or lose together. But there are degrees to this, and in this video we'll stretch the definition a little, looking at a number of games where players cooperate to a degree, but ultimately win or lose in isolation. Or where players compete in teams, collaborating with their teammates, but still striving to decimate their opponents. Every great game starts with a compelling idea. Now, in cooperative games, that concept is often framed as a shared crisis or mission. The players are in it together, so the scenario should naturally invite teamwork. Ask yourself, what are the players trying to achieve? Why do they need each other to succeed? And what is threatening their success? You might be designing a crew escaping a sinking submarine, or rebels resisting a corrupt empire, or scientists racing to avert ecological collapse. The clearer and more dramatic your central premise, the easier it is to build mechanisms that support it. So let's rewind to one of the earliest examples of cooperative gaming, and the biggest name in board gaming, Monopoly. Before Parker Brothers released their famous edition, an earlier version of the game existed, the Landlord's game, designed by an activist and political provocateur, Elizabeth McGee. The Landlord's game was intended to highlight the evils of land ownership and contrast them with the Georgist principles of collective ownership. And as such, it featured a cutthroat competitive variant, close to the game we now know as Monopoly, and a cooperative variant where players worked together to share the wealth. In the second mode of play, players could win together if the player with the least money doubled their initial stake. Essentially, players aimed for a draw. So this is one approach to cooperative gaming. It's a little different to many post-pandemic co-op games in that there's no antagonist, no automated opponent, though you are still at the mercy of dice rolls and event decks, which have become a staple of the genre. Playing for a specific balanced outcome, a tie perhaps, requires analysis of the game state and a constant understanding of each other player's current position. It's the basis of the cooperative trick-taking card game The Crew, where players work through one mission after another, each with a very specific goal to achieve. In Knizia's The Lord of the Rings, players represent hobbits, and they work their way through 4 scenarios in an attempt to transport the ring to Mount Doom. The game is largely about hand management, discarding cards with appropriate symbols whenever the game board or die tells you to, or advancing towards Sauron on the corruption track if you fail. When Moria is complete, players move on to the Helm's Deep board, then Shelob's Lair, and eventually Mordor. Reaching the end of the track allows you to place the ring in Mount Doom and win the game. But there are several ways to lose. For example, meeting Sauron on the corruption track will eliminate your hobbit from the game. If you're the ring bearer, that's game over. Reaching the final stage on the Mordor event track is also the end of the road for the hobbits. Now, Knizia has used cooperative gameplay primarily for thematic reasons. TV and movie tie-in games of the 1980s and 90s often used nonsensical narratives, pitting friendly characters against each other, or even featuring multiple versions of the same character for each individual player. I recall the absurd 1980s Batman game featuring multiple Batmen and Jokers competing against each other. Cooperative play was the answer to this conundrum. Knizia recognised that there were 2 opposing forces in Lord of the Rings, good and evil. Pitting Hobbit against Hobbit just wasn't going to fly. The whole story was about working together, so the game should be about this too. If you wanted the game to feature more than 2 players, it would need to be cooperative or team-based, and Knizia chose the former. The Lord of the Rings is a survival game. It's brutal. You don't build anything or overcome an opposing force or do anything creative, you just survive or perish. And that's a common feeling in many cooperative games, treading water. In The Lost Expedition, players control 3 explorers attempting to manoeuvre through a jungle, and each player is dealt 4 cards. They each select 2 to take effect. Once revealed, the cards are placed in numerical order, and then the icons on them are resolved one by one. Players are forced to spend food or bullets or lose health. And sometimes they gain resources, and sometimes the cards allow them to skip cards in the row, swap the position of cards, or place new cards at the end of the run. And this process of gaining and spending resources is repeated until the players move on to the final jungle space, winning the game together. Or all players lose their final health points and hence end in defeat. Now, this approach of just survive the onslaught can be frustrating. There aren't many high points, not moments of achievement or high fives between players, just occasional moments of calm in a near continuous barrage of negative events. In D-Day Dice, each player represents a unit of soldiers advancing up a beach in World War II. You select a map and place dice to indicate your position, and the aim is to move up the beach and into the bunker. On a player's turn, they roll 6 dice. They've got to lock 2, and then they get 2 more rolls for the remaining dice. The results can gain you soldiers and stars, which are used to buy specialists with ongoing powers, or tools for one-time use items, and courage, which you need to advance up the beach. At the end of each turn, you lose soldiers equal to the defence value of the sector that you're in, and sometimes this is made worse by machine gun fire, which adds a 6-sided dice roll to the defence. Of course, sometimes survive the onslaught is the right approach, thematically speaking. D-Day Dice is an excellent, compelling, war-themed survival game. In creating Pandemic, however, Matt Leacock's aim was to craft a game that wasn't just about survival, in this case the containment of a deadly disease, but instead to focus on teamwork and heroism. So Pandemic features moments of high achievement, curing and eliminating those diseases. Players get to be heroes. In Pandemic, players work together to cure 4 diseases which are spreading across the globe. On your turn, you can spend action points to take a variety of different actions, move across the board, discard city cards to travel longer distances, remove disease cubes, and build research stations. You can discard 5 matching coloured cards while at a station to cure the disease of that colour, and if you cure all 4 diseases, you win the game. But at the end of each turn, you must draw new cards into your hand, and if you draw an epidemic card, you must add cubes to the board and increase the infection rate. If you're ever required to place a 4th cube of a disease on a city, an outbreak occurs. You move the outbreak marker, and the disease spreads to surrounding cities. If the marker reaches the end of the track, all players lose the game. The control spread format of Pandemic introduced geography into the mix, whereby players had to control areas of a map, identifying hotspots, traversing the board as efficiently as possible, and preventing outbreaks between neighbouring areas. So a similar approach was taken in Flashpoint Fire Rescue, which focuses in on a single building and a fire spreading from room to room. A team of firefighters attempt to control the spread. In the cooperative Carcassonne game, Mists over Carcassonne, players follow the usual Carcassonne sequence of drawing a tile and then placing it. But when you add one of the foggy tiles, you also add ghosts as illustrated on the tile. And there are 15 of these in the supply, and if you ever run out, you lose the game. So you need to get them off the tiles as quickly as you can. Last Bastion is a reskin of the popular cooperative game Ghost Stories. Like Pandemic, it has a spatial component to it. Players move carefully within a central grid, positioning themselves to fight off a continuous wave of monsters attempting to breach the walls of the fortress. On your turn, you turn over a new monster card and place it outside of the walls, and each card has a different effect, and many spawn more monsters. You may then move and use an action, either fighting adjacent monsters or using the special ability of the tile that you're now standing on. Monsters can generate evil tokens, which can push through the walls of the fortress or cover players' abilities, rendering them useless. The players work their way through a deck of monsters until they defeat the warlord and win the game. Or until 3 evil tokens break through the fortress walls, ending the game in a loss. So this is the tower defense video game mechanism in board game form. By restricting players to a tight enclosed space, it creates a really tense claustrophobic atmosphere. Castle Panic is a more streamlined, literal representation of the tower defense family. You're tasked with protecting a central castle made up of 6 towers and 6 walls, and on your turn you can trade cards with other players and then play as many as you like, attacking advancing monsters in whichever board section you can reach. Each attack takes a hit point from the monster, either removing it from the board or rotating it to show its damaged status. Each monster on the board then moves 1 space closer to the castle, and 2 more monsters are then drawn randomly from the stack. A dice roll determines where on the board they commence their advancement. Some monster tokens reveal special events, moving all monsters in the green section, or moving all monsters anti-clockwise, or rolling a giant boulder through one section, destroying everything in its path. And if a monster would move through a wall, that wall is removed instead, and the monster takes 1 damage. If a monster moves into a space with a tower, then the tower is removed, and again the monster takes 1 damage. If all towers are destroyed, the players lose. And if all monsters are slain, the players win. Allow me to pause the discussion about cooperative games for 1 minute so I can tell you about my newest book on game design, my biggest book yet by far. It's called Adam in Wales Legacy, Design Lessons from History's Most Influential Tabletop Games, and as with my previous 4 books, it's available on Amazon as a paperback and as an ebook. Over more than 500 pages, I discuss the 100 most influential board games of all time, in my opinion at least, and the lessons that we can learn from them about designing game systems, presentation, theme, and how the industry works. The book is packed full of stories of the creators of historic games, how they got their start in the industry, where their inspiration came from, and what that means for modern game designers. For game players and collectors, this book tells a fascinating story of the development of the hobby over thousands of years, from chess to poker to Monopoly to Gloomhaven. For designers, it touches on industry trends, game genres, how to get your game published, and it introduces many publishers and other key players in the board game world. Adam in Wales Legacy is available on Amazon worldwide or as a downloadable ebook. Links are in the description below, and as always, if you've read the book or any of my books, please do leave me a review on Amazon. It helps so much with guiding Amazon to other designers and players who might be interested. So now, back to the video. If you could traverse a map in a game, another possibility emerges, the pick up and deliver mechanism. Locating an item, moving to collect it, then transporting it to another location while avoiding whatever other obstacles are placed in your way. So this format is well represented in the cooperative family of games. Flashpoint Fire Rescue is a great example, with players moving to specific locations to reveal unconscious residents in a burning building and then carrying them to safety outside of the building. In Ghost Fighting Treasure Hunters, players work together to escape the house with 8 jewels before 6 of the rooms become haunted. On your turn, you roll a die which tells you whether you need to place a ghost on the board. You flip over a card and place a ghost on the corresponding room. You can then move up to the number showing on the dice, and if you end your move in a room with a treasure, you place it in your backpack. And then on future turns you can move it out of the building to drop it off by the door. If all 8 jewels are removed from the house, then the players all win together. If 6 rooms are haunted, then the players all lose. Zombie Teens Evolution uses a similar premise, picking up crates and delivering them to buildings while fighting off an endless slew of zombies. Magic Maze is another example, with players attempting to get a team of heroes out of a shopping mall. Even though there are 4 heroes, no player owns a specific one. Any player can move any hero, but each player has a restriction. One can only move heroes north, another can only move them south, and so on. One player opens doors and reveals new tiles, another can use escalators. You flip a timer and begin moving heroes freely, constrained by your movement limitations. The goal is to get all heroes to a matching symbol and then out of matching exits. The key to Pandemic's design is the intelligent use of an event deck. Drawn epidemic cards are shuffled and restacked, ensuring that hot zones will erupt again and again. This system builds tension and it gives the game its intense dramatic arc. The deck of cards essentially acts as an automated opponent for players to compete against. Such automated opponents are now commonly used in solitaire games, and the principles of their design are the same for co-op games. While Pandemic's automatic opponent represents a spreading disease, and Flashpoint Fire Rescues represents a spreading fire, cooperative games like Gloomhaven and Zombicide simulate the movement, actions and attacks of enemy forces using similar principles. A designer's intent in creating an automated opponent should not be to replicate every aspect of what a human player would be doing if they were in control. An automated opponent should forego all the usual busy work carried out by a human player. They don't collect or convert resources. They don't maintain their own tableau. Their purpose is to replicate some of the tension and uncertainty of competing against an unpredictable human mind. An automated opponent should surprise you, block your progress, and make things more challenging, without making the game clunky or arduous. So how can designers achieve this? Well, firstly, you need to minimise procedural complexity. Players shouldn't have to spend more time and effort managing the automated opponent than playing their own turns. Pandemic's event deck follows simple, logical steps. Cards in such a deck should be quick to interpret at a glance, with clear iconography, colour coding and an appropriate hierarchy of information. Try to avoid multi-step processes and conditional steps. For example, if A happens, then do B. If C happens, then do D. This all adds cognitive load for the players and distracts them from their own turn and the fun choices that they want to be making. The goal should be predictable unpredictability. The outcome of an automated action should be surprising, but it shouldn't come totally out of left field. Players should be able to anticipate what may occur, even if they don't know exactly when or where it's going to happen. The logic underpinning movement in an automated system is particularly challenging. Using predefined paths for movement can feel too scripted, but conditional rules like move where the enemy does most damage can feel overcomplicated and cumbersome. Pandemic doesn't feature an enemy moving as such, but it does simulate the spread of disease from one location to another, and it does this through a very simple system of placing cubes in a location and then allowing them to break through into neighbouring regions when a threshold is reached. The alternative to using an automated opponent is to use a real one. Some games cast one player in the role of antagonist, while all the other players cooperate to defeat them. This has been a familiar structure since the invention of Dungeons and Dragons in 1974, with one player taking the role of Dungeon Master. but we can trace it back further to Kriegsspiel, a Prussian military training exercise from the early 1800s, which used a moderator to shape the developing narrative of a tabletop wargame, with one player resolving conflicts and devising intriguing new challenges for the players. One versus all has been a staple of the dungeon crawl genre since its inception, with one player setting up the dungeon tiles, revealing terrain items and obstacles, and controlling the movements of all the bad guys, while the other players form a party of heroes working together to complete perilous quests. The strength of a one versus all structure is that the enemies genuinely do behave intelligently, moving and attacking in a logical, deliberate manner, and most importantly, reacting and responding to the actions of the heroes. This doesn't have to diminish the cooperative elements though. There's still scope for some clever cooperative mechanisms in a one versus all game. In the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles game, Shadows of the Past, each turtle's actions are determined by a dice roll, and players position their dice in a line, with the dice at either end being available for their neighbouring player to share. That's apart from Raphael, the grumpiest of the turtles. He's got more dice than his teammates, but he never shares. Outside of the dungeon crawl and equivalent sci-fi or superhero settings, one versus all gameplay is less common, but it's not unheard of. One of my favourite games as a child was Ravensburger's 1983 Spiel des Jahres winner, Scotland Yard, which featured a single player acting as a fugitive, Mr. X, moving around a map of London, recording their moves on paper, but only revealing the modes of transport, taxi, bus or underground, to the other players. Those players act as a team of detectives, working together to deduce where Mr. X is located and honing in on him to make their arrest. It's not a great leap to move from one versus all gameplay to team versus team. And in these games, players cooperate with their teammates, but still compete against another team. This structure is rare in strategic games, so Captain Sonar would be a notable example, but it's a very common structure in the party game genre. So in Codenames, one player on the team acts as a clue giver, and every other player on the other team tries to decipher their clue to identify words in a grid. There are many such performer-guesser games where one player communicates a message to their teammates by drawing or miming or sculpting in clay, or by using cryptic wordplay. In Team 3, one player can see a pattern which their team needs to build, but they can only communicate with gestures. The player placing the blocks is blindfolded, so the gestures aren't going to help them much, but fortunately each team has a third player who interprets the gestures and explains verbally to the builder where to position the blocks. Team 3 makes a feature of limited communication, a great tool for slowing players down and making a simple task more complex to complete. Limited communication is a staple of the cooperative game genre. In Magic Maze, players must coordinate their moves to get their pieces into the correct positions to navigate their way out of the maze, but they're not allowed to speak at all, except at specific intervals throughout the game. The only mode of communication allowed for the bulk of the time is tapping a red wooden pawn, and of course this is meaningless. It essentially conveys, do something, without specifying what, and the resulting chaos and frustration creates most of the memorable moments in the game. In the mind, players each have a selection of cards with numbers on. They attempt to play the numbers in sequence, but they're not allowed to speak to each other, so they must use timing and intuition to deduce when to play their number. If successful, another round is played, this time with more cards in play, and so the difficulty ramps up from round to round. There are no other games which make you feel as in tune with your teammates as the mind. Completing the task with no mistakes frequently results in cheers and high fives. It's incredible that such a strong experience can be created from so little. In Mysterium, and its streamlined sequel Mysterium Park, one player plays as a ghost, and their job is to communicate messages to the other players, but they can only do this by giving them visions, dreamlike images which might hint at a specific person, location or item. Unable to speak, the ghost is trying to convey the circumstances surrounding a murder, and it's the job of the other players to collaboratively deduce their intent. In Witness, 4 players work through a series of crime-related puzzles. Each player reads their own unique clue. They then whisper their clue to another player, who passes on their own clue and the one they've just heard to another player by whispering, and so on until all clues have been shared. The players are then tasked with answering questions about the crime, drawing on the information they've elicited from whispered conversations. Of course, a lot gets lost or miscommunicated as it's passed down the chain. It's a hugely atmospheric and very funny structure for a game. One of the huge benefits of limiting communication in a cooperative game is that it prevents any one player from taking over all the decisions and dictating the actions carried out by all members of the team. This so-called alpha player problem is frequently discussed in game design circles, and views of designers and players differ. Some see anything hindering free communication and shared problem solving as a negative, an artificial constraint. Pandemic, Flashpoint Fire Rescue and many others do nothing to prevent players freely discussing their plans. No hidden information between players, no limitation on discussion or other forms of communication. If players want to fall behind a dominant player, following their advice, well, that's up to them. That's the nature of teamwork. Other designers and players do consider alpha players as a problem to be solved, an issue with the game's mechanisms. From this perspective, anything which potentially hinders a player or multiple players' enjoyment of a game is an issue, and it should be ironed out. An alpha player should not be able to dominate. The game should prevent it. It is for you as designer to decide which approach you want to take in your own design. The goal for designers in both camps is interdependence. Players should need one another's contributions. The strongest strategy should not simply be to follow the smartest person in the room. If you do want to reduce the impact of alpha players in your game, limited communication is the first tool that designers tend to employ. The second is real-time simultaneous play. In games like Escape, Curse of the Temple and Magic Maze, players are racing against the clock. They have to act fast to avoid defeat, so no one player has time to keep track of all the actions and choices being made by their teammates. Simple decisions feel urgent and exhilarating. But in an environment like this, you're essentially forced to make decisions on your own. While this is cooperative in the sense that all players are working towards the same goal, there's precious little in the sense of true collaboration going on. There's no shared decisions, no collective problem solving, and it's easy to feel lost in a game like this. When everyone's racing against the clock, there's no opportunity to clarify a rules query or correct an error. Your teammates are far too busy to hold your hand. In Magic Rabbit, rabbits numbered 1 to 9 are shuffled and placed face down. Matching hats, also numbered 1 to 9, are shuffled and placed on top of the rabbits, face up. And finally, doves are placed on top of a few of the piles. The 2.5 minute timer is flipped and the players start taking turns in silence. You're not allowed to talk to the other players around the table. Everybody's cooperating in an attempt at placing rabbit and hats in their correct positions in ascending numerical order from 1 to 9. And on your turn, you can do one action. Either peek at a rabbit beneath a hat, or swap the position of 2 hats, or swap the position of 2 piles, hat and rabbit together. The doves block you from doing any of these things, but at the end of your turn, you are also allowed to move 1 dove to a new position. And that's it. When the timer runs out, flip over the tiles and see how you've done. Now, when you've completed this basic version of the game, you're encouraged to open one of the envelopes included in the box, and these add in extra tiles with special rules and new hurdles to make the game more challenging. Combining the various modules results in 50 or more different possible variants with graded difficulty levels. One of the challenges in developing a cooperative game is setting an appropriate difficulty level. Some, like Robinson Crusoe and Ghost Stories, develop a reputation for being particularly brutal, with a victory being a rare event. This suggests the challenges could have been tweaked to make the game a little more forgiving for new players. But neither do you want your game to be too easy. If players win every time, why would they keep returning to the game? Flashpoint Fire Rescue, with its dice rolls to determine the spread of flames, can swing hugely. I've played games of it where we were successful without any problem at all. The flames just happened to have landed in the least perilous spots on each turn, through sheer luck. I've also played games of it which were totally unbeatable, again because of luck. This is entertaining to a degree. It's a really cinematic game, and high drama is expected and appreciated, but it can make strategizing feel a little bit pointless at times. In Pandemic, you can set the difficulty level to your preference by changing the number of epidemic cards shuffled into the deck at the start of the game. Mists over Carcassonne introduces new rules and tiles at different difficulty levels. Castles are completed by surrounding them on all sides, like monasteries from the original game, but these buildings score 2 points per adjacent foggy tile. Cemeteries are less desirable. Whenever at least one ghost is added to a foggy tile, an additional ghost is added to an open cemetery. The only way to shut the cemeteries down is to surround them on all 4 sides. At that point, all ghosts are removed and one meeple is laid down on the cemetery to show that it's no longer open. Later levels introduce new features to make the game even more challenging. What constitutes an appropriate difficulty level in a cooperative game is subjective, so I'm going to struggle to advise here. All I can offer is my own personal viewpoint. I want a cooperative game to offer a variety of modes of play. Playing beginner mode or family mode, I probably ought to be able to beat the game on the first attempt, though it might be challenging for a child. In regular mode, I want to lose my first game, maybe my second game too, but I should be able to see ways to improve. I would hope to win my third attempt, but narrowly. In difficult mode, or super difficult mode, I would need to understand the game's interlocking systems in much more detail. I would expect to be min-maxing resources and efficiently pairing character abilities to create the most effective combinations. Any wasted or inefficient turn should result in a loss. At the most challenging levels, I would also require a bit of good luck alongside expert strategizing to defeat the game. I want a win to feel earned and a loss to feel fair. I want tension, not hopelessness. One challenge for designers of a cooperative game is achieving a consistent difficulty across a wide variety of player counts. In Flashpoint Fire Rescue, the dice are rolled and the flames spread after each player turn. In a 2-player game, that means you can respond fairly quickly. The flames will spread twice before you take your next turn, once after your turn and once after your teammates. In a 6-player game, there's going to be 6 dice rolls before your next turn, which means the game state will change dramatically before you can take your next action, and you'll have no ability to respond. In this sense, the larger player count is more challenging, but on the flip side, in a 2-player game, the firefighters have a lot of ground to cover, lots of victims to save, and there's only so much each player can do. In a 6-player game, firefighters will spread out and have a more diverse range of specialties and abilities, which makes things easier. So I would struggle to say which version of the game is more challenging, but the experience is far from consistent. The game feels very different at each player count. When designing for difficulty in a cooperative game or a competitive one, I tend to use myself as a benchmark. Now that's because I think I'm an average strategist. I lose more competitive games than I win, but I'm usually in the middle of the pack. I think, as a designer, you need to have some insight into your own strategic ability. If you're a super competitive player, if you win a lot more games than you lose, any cooperative game that you design is likely to be extremely challenging for the average player. Likewise, if you're a weak strategic player, your cooperative design is likely to end up being too easy. This is where carefully selecting your playtesters is helpful. You know that one person in the group who never loses? The one who aces every game, even on their first run at it. The one where in a game against them you consider second place as a win. Get that genius playing your game. If they're struggling to beat it, well, there's a benchmark for your advanced level. And what about the fella who never wins? Who struggles to grasp rules, who's always a few steps behind the rest of the group when it comes to picking up games? Get them involved too. They're your benchmark for easy mode. Probably don't involve them in the same playtests as the mastermind though, unless you want to see the alpha player problem in action. Another way to keep all players invested in the game and encourage them to take ownership of their own decisions is to provide each player with their own unique powers. So in Pandemic, each player has their own special role, which allows them to break some rules, move other players' pawns, build research stations more easily, travel more easily across the board, cure diseases more easily, etc. Likewise, in Flashpoint Fire Rescue, some firefighters find it easier to combat flames. Another has expertise in operating the fire engine. The medic can revive trapped victims, making it easier to shift them out of the building. And the rescue dog is, well, a dog. If these special powers interlock in a variety of interesting ways, this encourages collaboration between players. Perhaps one character is great at setting traps, while another excels at luring the enemy, drawing them in and dispatching them. This approach doesn't completely prevent one player taking over all the decisions, but it does help. If a player can identify with their character, they're more likely to stand up for them, arguing for a specific strategy based on that character's strengths. Cooperative games with open information and free communication, like Pandemic and Flashpoint, are essentially solitaire puzzles with a degree of complexity that makes them easier to handle by dividing tasks among multiple players. In a more complex cooperative game like Spirit Island, it would be hard for one player to keep track of all the player abilities and options while also focusing on their own. It's far easier to dominate proceedings in a simple game than it is in a more complex one. At the opposite end of the spectrum from Spirit Island, there are very many accessible cooperative games which revolve around simple puzzles with multiplayer gameplay adding in an extra layer of fun and engagement without complicating matters. In Micro Macro, a large map is laid on the table, illustrating a densely populated city full of activity. Players are tasked with locating certain characters and incidents, tracing them through the city to determine the precise details of a variety of crimes. As an activity, it doesn't really require multiple people, but the sheer scale of the map makes it a little easier to handle with a team working together, and the social aspect of discussing the cases lifts the experience too. In Bandido, players each have a hand of 3 cards depicting tunnels. On your turn, you connect one of your tunnels to the maze already on the table. Players alternate placing a card and then drawing a new card, and you can discuss strategy with the other players, but you can never show them your cards. The aim of the game is to lay tunnels such that all the exits have been blocked off. If you achieve this, all players win together. If all cards have been played and there's still an exit available, the Bandido escapes and all players lose. In Sprawlopolis, the back of each card has a scoring condition on it, and 3 of these are selected to generate the puzzle for the game. The target score is determined by adding the 3 numbers. Each player starts the game with a single card, but the start player has 2 additional cards. On your turn, you play a card and then pass the remaining 2 cards to your neighbour, so they now have a hand of 3 to select from. A card must be placed adjacent to existing cards or slightly overlapping, and they'll create blocks of matching terrain as well as connected networks of roads. When all 15 cards have been played, the game ends. Players score 1 point per block in the largest group of each zone type, and they lose 1 point per connected road in the city. And finally, players score points for various criteria as determined by the selected cards at the start of the game. So for example, you might be required to place park blocks inside the city, but never on the edge, or score points for industrial blocks adjacent only to commercial and other industrial blocks. Or perhaps you need roads between parks. If you beat the target score, you win. If you've got a concept for a solitaire game, it's worth considering whether the experience might be lifted by introducing more players and a small element of communication and interaction. Sometimes this is as simple as restricting certain information or components to certain players, so they've got to collaborate to piece together the various items or pieces of information to complete the puzzle successfully as a team. This is the basis for escape room games like Exit the Game and Unlock, and also for many narrative games like adventure games The Dungeon or Cartaventura. In Animals of Baker Street, a group of players take control of a group of animals. A curious mouse who's great at finding stuff, a swift, agile blue tit, a persuasive, charming frog, and a slightly psychopathic tarantula who reportedly arrived in Baker Street in a crate of bananas. The group selects their mission, then reads the introductory passage from their casebook. Each revolves around solving some sort of crime. There are no real turns in the game. The group simply decides which location to visit and reads the corresponding card. They can then choose to utilise characters, items and information in that location by combining cards and looking to see how the icons line up to determine whether new information is revealed. However, players need to take care because unsuccessful actions frequently cost the group time. There's only so many clock tokens to discard before the mission ends in failure. The party game Mafia was first created in 1986 by Dmitry Davidov, a psychology student at Moscow State University. His goal was to design an activity that delivered maximum engagement with minimum time and resources, a hallmark of great social games. These early experiments in group dynamics and deception eventually evolved into the game Mafia and ultimately Werewolf. The game spread rapidly among students, first played in classrooms, then in dormitories and at summer camps. Now, Werewolf is played by 2 teams, secretly assigned at the start of the game by a moderator who facilitates the game but doesn't play. The first team is a large group of villagers who doesn't know the identity of the other players. The second team is a small group of killers, the werewolves, who know the identity of all players. The game is divided into day and night phases, and each night the werewolves secretly choose someone to eliminate. Each day, all players, including the werewolves pretending to be villagers, discuss and vote on who to eliminate, attempting to root out the killers. The game involves cooperation, but also deception, persuasion, and deduction. When cooperative games burst onto the scene in the early 2000s, perhaps it was inevitable that designers would look to the social dynamics at play in Werewolf and draw on some of that manipulation and mistrust to spice up their cooperative games. In Shadows over Camelot, players are knights of the Round Table working together to complete quests and defend Camelot from threats. But at the start of the game, one player might have been assigned the role of traitor. On your turn, you must first choose an evil action, such as adding siege engines or drawing a black card or losing a life point, and then perform a heroic action like moving to a quest, playing cards to progress it, or healing. Quests include defeating the Black Knight, recovering Excalibur, or repelling Picts and Saxons. Successes add white swords to Camelot, failures add black swords. Players win with a majority of white swords when the game ends, but they lose if the table either fills with siege engines, or all knights die, or black swords outnumber white. Of course, your chances of success are much reduced if one player is secretly working against you. Other designers used a similar approach, so Battlestar Galactica had players swap teams as the game progressed. Insider was a cooperative game of 20 questions with a traitor. A Fake Artist in New York was a cooperative drawing and guessing game with a traitor. Deception Murder in Hong Kong took the basic premise of Mysterium and added a traitor. As the cooperative genre established itself and proved that it was here to stay, designers noted that team members interacting in real life don't always work towards a common goal, and they don't divide themselves into distinct black and white groups, good versus evil. The psychology of collaboration isn't as straightforward as that. In the real world, people often work together out of mutual interest or out of altruism, but sometimes their own ego gets the better of them and they pursue their own interests to the detriment of the group. Life is semi-cooperative, and designers started to explore whether a game could replicate this. For a few years, semi-cooperative became the trendy new buzzword in strategy games. Semi-co-op games were released where players won or lost together, but then scores were counted up and one overall winner was declared from within the winning team. Castle Panic provides victory points to each player based on the number of monsters that they kill. Marvel Legendary is another prominent example of this approach. And the issue with this structure became quickly apparent. We're all playing together as a team, but I'm aware that someone else is ahead of me on points. So do I continue to collaborate, helping that other player achieve their win and accepting what is called a team win but feels like a personal loss? Or do I sabotage the group, pushing for a team loss, which essentially equates to a draw? This conundrum plagues semi-cooperative designs, and it remains one of the biggest challenges for modern strategy game designers. I'm sure there are some great semi-cooperative games out there, but I haven't yet really played one in this format. Or perhaps that's unfair. Dead of Winter does come close. It's a cooperative game with a good cast of characters with differing personalities and wants and needs, but all brought together with the overarching goal of surviving a zombie onslaught. So we now have cooperative games featuring a little bit of competition, but the opposite does also exist, and it has done so for much of the history of gaming. Many competitive games require a healthy dose of cooperation between players. So we're back to the game that I introduced right at the start of the video, Between Two Castles. And here you're tasked with building two castles, one shared with your left and one shared with your right neighbour. Turns are simultaneous. You select two from a hand of tiles and then pass the rest around the table. And one of your chosen tiles must be placed in the castle to your left and one in the castle to your right. Now, crucially, you're encouraged to discuss with each of your neighbours which tile you should place and where. It's to both players' benefit that the castle scores well, because at the end of the game, you're going to score points only for the lowest scoring of your two castles. Now, points are scored for a wide variety of scoring bonuses as printed on the various tiles, and there are restrictions on what type of room can be built where. For example, nothing can be built on top of an outdoor room. Collecting multiple tiles of a single type brings additional tiles and tokens and bonuses into your castle. So Between Two Castles is not a cooperative game, but it does nonetheless require significant cooperation between players. Zoo Vardis is a competitive game which requires cooperation in the form of intense negotiation. In Zoo Vardis, you control a group of animals trying to occupy the highest position on the zoo board. Your pieces start at the base of the board and they must make deals to progress, gaining laurels along the way. In your turn, you can add an animal to the base of the board or advance one of your animals already on the board. But in order to do this, you must get agreement from the majority of the other animals in the same exhibit space as you. In order to get this agreement, you might pay laurels or promise your own support for that player's future moves. There are also neutral animals, peacocks, who can always be bribed for a vote at a fixed cost. If you don't want to move your own animals, you can always move a peacock even without majority agreement, potentially freeing up space for your own animals, or blocking spaces for opponents. Each animal type has their own beneficial special ability, but these abilities can't be used on your own pieces, only on other players' animals, so the abilities should be offered up as incentives for other players to give you their votes. When all spaces in the final exhibit are filled, the game ends and players count their laurels. The player with the most laurels wins. So let's pull all this together and summarise. Here are some of the questions to ask yourself if you want to produce a cooperative game. Is your game heavily thematic? Does it have a strong narrative that naturally encourages cooperation between players? Would the characters in your story realistically work together? Or would some have personal agendas or motivations that could introduce a bit of conflict or tension? Could any characters work outright against the rest of the group? Are you envisioning a fully cooperative game, or a team-based game, or one with hidden traitors or shifting alliances? Would your concept work just as well, or better, as a competitive or a semi-cooperative game, perhaps with negotiation, diplomacy, or shared short-term goals? What's the overall objective of the game? Are players working towards a single end goal, a series of missions, or are they simply trying to survive? If survival's the goal, how do you maintain player engagement and momentum? Could you introduce some lighter moments or opportunities for your players to gain some respite along the way? Little wins, moments of triumph, opportunities to be the hero. Does the narrative or gameplay evolve over time, for example through campaign or legacy or branching scenarios? Does your game feature a spatial element like a map or a grid? So what drives players to explore or move between areas? How do you represent time, urgency, or escalation? Is there a ticking clock or an advancing threat? Who or what is the antagonist? A monster? A disease? A looming disaster? How's it controlled? By a player? Or by dice rolls? Or by a deck of cards? Or maybe an app? How can the automated opponent's behaviour feel intelligent without being overly complex or fiddly? And how can these components be used in clever ways to ramp up tension, to give a sense of progression and prevent each turn playing out the same as the last? What's the default difficulty of your game? Is it scalable? How do you make the first playthrough accessible while still offering long-term challenge and variety? What levers can you pull to increase or decrease difficulty? Can players choose different levels or moderate the difficulty through setup? How far can you crank up the difficulty before it becomes impossible to beat? Is the difficulty consistent regardless of player count? And if not, how are you going to address this? How much do you want to constrain alpha players? Are you going to leave it to players to sort out the social dynamics in their group? Or are you going to incorporate mechanisms which prevent someone taking over team decisions? Limiting communication, simultaneous turns, giving each player their own specific role and abilities to give them a sense of ownership. Are their abilities and actions meaningful, distinct, and necessary for success? What emotions do you want your players to feel? Tension? Desperation? Triumph? Sacrifice? Is the game designed to reward cooperation and communication? Or is it more about strategic puzzle solving? Are there dramatic highs and lows, twists, reveals, or set-piece moments? Designing a cooperative board game is like building a puzzle that reshapes itself each time it's played. Make sure that it tells a compelling story, offers opportunities for players to shine, and challenges them to work together in creative ways. So I hope this has sparked some ideas for you, or given you some ideas to reflect on if you're already in the process of designing your own cooperative game. And if you're not a designer, then I hope it's demonstrated some new titles which you hadn't heard of, but you might want to give a try. If you enjoyed this video, why not watch this one next?